April's public forum resolution is resolved the United States federal government should permit the use of financial incentives to encourage organ donation. I'm going to talk a little bit about this month's topic in general, then some words for it, then a little bit how this actually deals with plans, counterplans, and the theory of public forum debate, then just about common arguments and bias. So April's topic is one that isn't as widely debated as many of the others. Most of the big invitationals are over. The big events in April are NFL districts for some states, CFL Metro Finals for some dioceses, and as well as obviously the TOC, which is a slightly different beast than the vast majority of public forum debate, just because of how the judging and the style changes. Anyhow, some words in the resolution that bear looking at are United States federal government. And this is important for a couple reasons. The first of which is that we're obviously talking about central, not state. This doesn't mean that Con can advocate states do the same thing, if it's not excluded by or opportunity cost of the resolution, but it does mean that we're talking about what the federal government can and can't do, what they are and aren't allowed to do. Generally speaking, they're allowed to deal with organ transplantation because that can occur between states. For instance, NOTA, the current National Organ Transplant Act, is allowed because it falls under the Interstate Commerce Clause, which allows the federal government to regulate any kind of transaction that would occur between people in different states. Second, it talks about permitting the use. Permitting is passive, so they're permitting other people to use incentives, or they are allowing agencies of their own to, or they are allowing nonprofits to. And again, use could be public, could be private. There's a pretty wide variety here. Pro kind of has to defend them all, kind of can't pick which one it wants to focus on, but at the same time can disqualify some by saying, well, these still wouldn't be allowed for certain reasons. Next up is financial incentives, which doesn't just mean giving money to people for kidneys. There's a lot more subtlety to it than that. And financial incentives can be tax credits, they can be vouchers for organ donation of your own, they can be healthcare reductions, they could be funeral costs, they could be deferred expense from something else. For instance, many states link organ donation to driver's licenses and might allow organ donors to waive the renewal fee for driver's licenses if laws blocking financial incentives were suddenly repealed. Now, generally the way organ donation works is the federal government has a couple laws that say this is what you can't do with organ donation. Each state has laws below that which say, well, this is what you actually can do, falling within those federal restrictions. The last thing I want to talk about as far as definitions go is just organ donation, because that can mean one of two things, and which it means actually shapes the debate a little bit. It can either be the process of becoming an organ donor, of registering to donate one's organs, or it can be the act of actually donating an organ, either alive or after death. If it's after death, then it could be either the process of becoming a donor with your family agreeing to, or it could just be, again, the donation of specific organs. And that's kind of up in the air. There's no clear grammatical standard that points one way or the other, like with most of the other questions people are asking about in the resolution. Anyhow, what makes this resolution interesting is that the vast majority of the literature on it isn't actually about the plan. It's not actually about the financial incentives. It's not about is organ donation good or bad. It's not about is the current organ shortage good or bad. It's about what is the best method to fix it, and the reality of the world does not conform too well to the rules behind public forum debate in this regard. So, for instance, most people are saying which system works best, but obviously you can't counterplan in public forum because that is an off-case position, distraction, resolutional debate. That doesn't mean the con team can't advocate something of their own, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how this changes in this month's topic and why I think this is going to force a lot of the public forum community to actually reconsider what they think of as a plan, what they think of as a counterplan, or if this be a debatable topic. So just really quickly going to gloss over the NFL rules relevant to this, which are of course in effect at districts, at states, at qualifiers, at NJFLs, and at NFL Nationals. They are more guidelines at the TOC, even though it does use the official NFL topic and times. There is no hard and fast rule that says all NFL rules must be in effect. Anyhow, the rules go on to say, public forum debate focuses on advocacy of a position about the issues presented in the resolution, not a prescribed set of burdens. In public forum debate, the NFL defines a plan or counterplan as a formalized, comprehensive proposal for implementation. Neither the pro or con side is permitted to offer a plan or counterplan. Rather, they should offer reasoning to support a position of advocacy. Debaters may offer generalized practical solutions. So really it comes down to what counts as generalized, what counts as practical. A plan would be pro saying, okay, we think incentives are good. Here's a specific incentive that we're going to argue that should be passed. And Khan says, no, that's not going to work. Here's a better incentive. That would be a plan and a topical counterplan. Then there are non-topical counterplans, which prove the resolution false, but are still an advocacy of their own and still kind of detract from it. We should focus on organ donation. No, we shouldn't. We should focus on education and research first. That would be a counterplan that doesn't directly agree with the resolution, but still isn't debating directly against the resolution. And I don't think that the resolution requires Khan to argue that the organ shortage that's currently costing lives is a good thing. I don't think the framers intended Pro to have a monopoly on solutions and Khan to have a monopoly on problems. I do think Khan can point out opportunity costs as long as they avoid detailed and planned proposals and stick with the general advocacy. So, if Khan can offer generalized practical solutions, they have to be able to offer some solution. And that seems to be encouraged, so I'm just going to talk about how that would be done. Generally speaking, there's a bunch of solutions to the organ shortage that don't rely on paying, and then one or two that do rely on paying donors for organs. If you implement the ones that pay people, then the possibility of the ones people doing it for free suddenly decrease a lot. Very unlikely someone would volunteer to do something for free if there's also a financial incentive to do the same thing and get paid money. So at that point, it becomes kind of difficult for Khan to argue without talking about how this precludes other solutions. Now, Khan can't argue for any one of those solutions. It can't pick which act would implement those solutions, but it can say, look, if we pay people money, they stop doing this for free. If they stop doing this for free, bad things happen. Opportunity costs in policy debate, for instance, are sometimes phrased as disads and sometimes phrased as counterplans. The difference in there is one of fiat, of whether we imagine it passes, whether we argue about whether or not it would pass. In this particular case, I think it just comes down to, does it directly prove the resolution false, or is it just another way of getting at the resolution? That decides whose ground it is. Anyhow, we're going to go from there into some of the actual arguments for both sides. And I'm going to start with Pro, then go to Con, then go back to Pro. And the reason for that will become explanatory as I do so. Pro's biggest reason is that we have an organ shortage now, and it's killing people, and the status quo is bad. Pro is also going to argue that financial incentives help to fix this because it increases the number of people willing to donate organs. There's currently a collective action problem going on with organ donation right now, where a lot of people would be willing to be organ donors, but because there is such a shortage, they were afraid that if they become organ donors, then people will spend less effort trying to save them in a car accident or something. So at that point, they don't become organ donors because not enough other people are. If you find some way to make a bunch of people organ donors all at once, then theoretically this collective action problem would go away. But generally, Pro is going to follow a fairly short, succinct syllogism. There is a shortage now. Financial incentives will help to alleviate that shortage. Financial incentives are a good moral option. And the vast majority of the rest is going to just defense against the various dystopian claims that Khan is going to make, claiming that the free market will actually correct for or prevent any of the nightmare scenarios that Khan talks about. So I'll deal with most of the other Pro arguments. What I'm talking about Khan was as far as what Pro would do to play defense against those. So the most common Khan argument is just going to be perverse incentives. That there are negative consequences this creates to organ sales. And it's going to go over how they exploit the poor, how they might actually reduce donations because they commodify this, how they lead to a system of exploitation, how they stop people from being able to do this, how they stop poor people from ever being able to get an organ because they can't afford it. It'll increase it overall, but decrease it based on need. It'll corrupt the process. It'll bring other financial systems into this. It will lead to a slippery slope where other kinds of things go on the market that never should be. It'll erode the foundations of government morality and society. Depends on how far down the slippery slope the Khan team wants to go. Anyhow, the actual point that I'm making here is that Khan is mainly going to talk about how bringing money into this, putting a price on organs, putting a price on life is bad. Khan cannot necessarily argue that this is illegal. It is obviously illegal. The question is, should it be made illegal? The resolution, more or less, is should the NOTA be repealed? And at that point, it would behoove Khan teams to actually look and see why this law was enacted in the first place. Many of the objections that Khan teams bring up, such as black market, such as exploitation of the poor, can actually be answered with inevitability claims by the Pro team. Pro can very easily blunt a lot of this offense by saying, but this is happening anyway, we need to be able to regulate it to stop it from happening. That's just not the case right now. What's happening right now is you have a huge organ black market, which is costing us money to try and shut down, and which none of the money is going to the government, none of the money is going to the actual legitimate medical institutions. If it's going to happen anyway, we might as well legitimize it, regulate it, and do it in a way that is the least unfair to everyone involved, which you can't have if you just pretend it isn't happening and refuse these incentives to go through the government, instead have them go through organized crime, or go through individual doctors acting outside the law, or something like that. So these inevitability claims are usually good answers to arguments about medical tourism, answers about exploitation of people in other countries, answers about the black market, etc., and Pro can get away with a lot on that. Anyhow, there's a bunch of other individual, smaller arguments that can be made on these things. I'll talk about specific ones if you have questions about them. Again, feel free to email me or toss a comment on here about them if you do. But I'm just going to get on to the next part of this, which is I think the resolution currently has a slight pro bias. I would rather be pro than con debating this resolution, just because reasons why the organ shortage is bad right now are pretty much indisputable. You can't really argue that organ shortage is good, and horror stories about existing victims are usually going to resonate more with judges than horror stories about some imaginary future which may or may not occur. So at that point, I think that pro has a slight edge there. The other reason I think pro has an edge is just that they are actually doing something, and they can frame con as being the side of inaction in the vast majority of debates. So again, I think this is one of the better balanced topics this year. I think it's pretty close, but I still think that pro has a slight edge, just based on many judges' attitudes toward this going in, and based on the fact that most of con's objections will seem far-fetched, whereas most of pro's objections are real and happening to real people right now. As far as speaking order goes, I would prefer to speak first on this topic. I think the ability to frame the topic in your first speech is huge. I think the ability to spin crossfire immediately after a crossfire to be the next thing that speaks and say, look, this is what happened in this crossfire, these are the mistakes both sides made, or this is the mistake I'm going to cover for my partner, is exceptionally useful. And I think having the last final focus is less of an asset than it normally is, because both sides' arguments are very predictable. You know what the other side is going to say already, and generally you can shut down their final focus without too much disadvantage, even if you speak first. Speaking second is still certainly viable, but again, just like I think pro is doing slightly better than con this month, I think that speaking first will work out slightly better than speaking second this month for either side. Anyhow, that's about all I have on this topic. If you have any questions, particularly about what the role of plans, counterplans, what would and wouldn't count as either, how they differ in different events, what this actually means for your league, for the tournament you are going to, etc., feel free to shoot me an email, feel free to leave me a comment, feel free to catch me on GChat, whatever works best for you, and I will get back to you on that and try and post some updates on that as people come up with them. Hope this helps everybody. Good luck in district, TRCs, quals, whatever you have to be debating in April. And I will see you all either at NDCAs if you are going there, or at CFLs or the TRC if you're not going to be debating until then. Best of luck.